Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining me for another conversation on Ask the Blood Detective. My name is Dr. Michael Wald. For those who don't know me, I'm the host of Ask the Blood Detective on the online radio show prnfm.com. Again, Ask the Blood Detective. And my website is drmichaelwald.com. You can listen to or watch many of my other previous shows under the blog section of my website, again, under drmichaelwald.com, and email me or communicate with me through either phone or email at info@blooddetective.com regarding maybe your comments or input and ideas for future shows. I really appreciate that. And if you're interested in seeing me as a patient, the best way to do that would be to call me at 914-552-1442. So let's get started on what I believe is a very relevant topic. It may not seem as relevant to some of you based on its title, but just give me 60 seconds and I think you'll see what I mean. The presumptive title for this talk is Autism, Down's Syndrome, Special Needs, and the Brain. Now, what all of these things have in common is the nervous system. And the nervous system, it's important to understand, is basically run by a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is just a big word that describes the nervous system's ability to repair and maintain a malleable relationship to the environment so that changes can take place. Usually, neuroplasticity is used in a positive sense where neuroplastic changes, let's say, occur in the nervous system of, let's say, a stroke patient, which allows them to start to speak again or at least improve or maybe improve their motor function, their walking, for example. And then there is neuroplasticity that might result in adverse symptoms, meaning that the brain may be less neuroplastic, less able to improve itself. It's important that you keep this concept of neuroplasticity in mind because every nutritional and environmental and dietary or lifestyle concept that I'll be discussing today has in common the nervous system. And if that's true, then a variety of nutritional products can affect various diseases. Again, why? Because they have their origin in the nervous system. So, having said that, let us begin with our disclaimer. And basically, what I'm trying to say here is that the information in this presentation is for educational information only. It's not meant to substitute for medical or health advice, and any use or misuse of this information is your responsibility. A little bit about me you should know about your speaker. I have a chiropractic degree. I did graduate medical school. I have a master's in nutrition, 2 board certifications in nutrition. I'm a certified nutrition specialist. I'm a dietitian, a life coach, and I also practice, I also deliver acupuncture in various states. The reason why I sought these various educational credentials is not to show off, I promise. It was because I felt that I was missing a perspective, and I want to personally develop my perspective as much as I can so that when I'm exposed to information regarding either autism or special needs concerns of any type, Down syndrome, you name it, that I can give my patients more of my experience, more expertise that's well-rounded. It's really that fact. So when you are searching for a nutritionally oriented health provider, if you're interested in that in terms of improving the health or wellness of either you or maybe a family member or a friend that has anything neurological going on or any health problem, you might want to choose a practitioner who has training that is not so compartmentalized. Okay. So let's talk about a few aspects of the nervous system that are particularly important. And we'll begin by using autism as a model, but please remember what I said. Neuroplasticity involves any condition that involves the nervous system. Autism is obviously no exception. Down syndrome is no exception. Alzheimer's disease, dementia, multiple sclerosis, neuropathies, seizures, all of this stuff is nervous system. And many of the identical nutritional considerations can help these conditions if used correctly. So all neurological disorders share the characteristic of neuroplasticity. We know this. Now, the prevalence of autism spectrum disorders, you should know, is increasing all the time and is currently estimated to affect about 1 in 150 children. That is astounding to me. To me, that's an epidemic. A major health and educational problem, of course, affecting many areas of our daily living, including how we live. Children with autism spectrum disorders are often described as picky or selective eaters. Now I'm getting into some characteristics here of autism, which I'll repeat the most important ones as we go along. And if those with autism are picky eaters, they're generally going to suffer from undernutrition or malnutrition. And the reason this has to be corrected is this. Even if a person has autism or a child has autism, the neuroplastic potential, the potential for repair is always there. You know, in neurologic circles and psychological circles, they love to talk about how the brain is not fully formed until the individual reaches something like the 25th to 26th year of living. And that may be true that certain neurological pathways are more solidified at that age. They're less malleable to change, but we know that we can affect the nervous system at any age whatsoever. So there's always opportunity to consider nutrition and other types of natural health advice and perspectives. So this last bullet's particularly important too. The rapid pace of fetal development by far exceeds any other stage of lifespan, and thus environmental influences can profoundly alter the developmental course. What does that mean? All that means is that when that developing fetus is moving from an embryo into a fetus into a baby, there are a multitude of opportunities for things not to go right because things are changing so fast. As things change so fast, I mean, think about when you do a bunch of things, let's say at once, and you're trying to get through them quickly. You're bound to make mistakes. And these are genetic mistakes and developmental mistakes that can determine, largely the person with autism or any other neurologic problems, entire life after that. And it doesn't end in the womb. It continues afterwards, meaning that there are effects of the environment, including toxins, electromagnetic influences, stress influences, nutritional influences that have epigenetic effects upon the individual throughout their lifespan, meaning that you and I can suffer from all kinds of issues because of genetic problems, genetic changes that occur even after we're born. So let's talk about some of these characteristics and concepts. Stress during the prenatal period, including malnutrition, as I just spoke of, as well as inflammation, impacts maternal and fetal neurodevelopment with long-term consequences, both physically and mentally. Now, the primary concern with maternal malnutrition and inflammation and other sources of prenatal stress is a poor birth outcome. We want the best outcome possible. But medicine, I must say, is not very much focused on nutrition or inflammation, and they don't pay enough attention to families where there are neurologic problems, where there are other babies being born, let's say, where they could take steps in the womb to help proper development, and steps very immediately after birth and throughout one's life if there's a higher genetic susceptibility or just what seems like a higher susceptibility for anything neurologic. There's so much opportunity to do well, as you will see as I continue. Third bullet, fetal growth restriction in both term and preterm infants is associated with all kinds of neonatal morbidities and a wide variety of behavioral and psychological diagnoses in childhood and adolescence, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety, depression, poor social skills, and even autism spectrum disorder, not to mention Down syndrome. So just malnutrition that results in growth problems of the fetus can lead to these and many other, we'll call them neurological problems now, but they're obviously larger than that. So my last bullet here, improving maternal child health requires interventions that begin before pregnancy and continue throughout gestation and into the postpartum period. We know, for example, if you want to offset and reduce the risk of 80% of birth defects, you'd want to take activated folic acid, not just regular folic acid, but activated folic acid at least 3 months before you even think of getting pregnant, because that's when a lot of opportunity exists to derail many things that can be caused by neurologic developments from just folic acid deficiency. And that's just one of the nutrients involved in proper neurologic development. So autism spectrum disorders compromises a complex set of related developmental disorders that are characterized by impairments in communication, social interaction, and repetitive behaviors. These are all manifestations of a nervous system that was not formed correctly and is not forming correctly. So again, this is the opportunity we have with proper nutrition, even after birth, to help manage these issues. Neurodegenerative diseases, all of these diseases I'm talking about here, autism, Down syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, seizures, etc., are characterized by protein aggregates and inflammation, as well as oxidative stress. So what does that mean? This is so key. I must make sure you understand this. Any of the conditions of the nervous system that we're speaking about, but particularly autism and Down syndrome, have something in common. The nervous system can only degenerate in so many ways. So we have neurodegenerative diseases where there are protein aggregates in the nervous system that cause dysfunction and inflammation that cause dysfunction. And one of the types of adverse events is over-oxidation, which is basically over-inflammation and breakdown of tissues. So this is where the opportunity comes in for nutrients and foods to interact with these adverse pathways. Last bullet, multiple biological processes are linked to neurodegenerative disorders, such as depletion or insufficient synthesis of neurotransmitters, oxidative stress, and something called abnormal ubiquination. Abnormal ubiquination is just some big word for saying that there's some protein that adversely affects some other proteins. But the point I want to get across here is that of the multiple problems that can go wrong in the nervous system that can lead to a worse course of autism, Down syndrome, or you name the neurologic process, involves not enough production of certain neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are simply chemicals that allow for thoughts, feelings, emotions, and repair and functioning of the nervous system to take place. 80% of neurotransmitters in the brain come from the diet. Now, how can this be true? And how can neurologists and other types of doctors ignore this information? The answer to that question is, I don't know, but they sometimes do. Oxidative stress, we have antioxidants for that. So much opportunity. Okay. Now, damage of the blood-brain barrier in the central nervous system also leads to various neurologic disorders. So the CNS is the central nervous system. The blood-brain barrier is that barrier between the brain and the rest of the body that is semi-permeable, which means it allows certain chemicals to get through and not others. But if certain toxins are there and nutrition is off, the blood-brain barrier starts to break down. That barrier that's supposed to be semi-protective or fully protective but semi-permeable doesn't work properly, and all hell breaks loose. So that's part of the reason why we have these neurodevelopmental problems in the first place, due to a breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. And the last bullet, numerous researchers have demonstrated various alterations in the inflammatory pathways, immune and oxidative stress pathways, and one I haven't mentioned yet called mitochondrial dysfunction and impairments in sensory processing. So all of these problems, oxidative stress, inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, which has to do with developing cellular energy, and then that leads to impairment in sensory function, all happens in these neurologic problems. All can respond to some extent, potentially, to improve nutrition. Now, in terms of some of the fundamental areas of consideration, nutritionally speaking, in autism, and as I've said, these nutrients also can apply to anything neurologic, any neurologic disease at all, or forget disease. You, as a healthy person, presumably, to protect that brain of yours, these are some of the things you might want to consider. So, for example, eating organically whenever possible, because we know that herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, and GMO foods adversely affect the nervous system. There's just no doubt at all. Nutritional supplements, either deficiencies of certain nutrients, or what I call macronutrition, like deficiencies of proteins, or malnutrition of proteins, or not enough fatty acids or healthy fats in the diet, just to name a few, will wreak havoc upon the nervous system. And then again, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fatty acids like fish oil or flax oil, phytonutrients from plants, fruits and vegetables. All of these nutritional factors have shown to be positive contributors to neuroplastic effects, to improved neuroplasticity. Now, we might have deficiencies of different nutrients or what I call insufficiencies, meaning your blood test might show, or the blood test of the person with autism or Down syndrome, for example, might show normal amounts of nutrition, but that individual might have greater neuroplastic potential, greater repair of the nervous system if they had higher levels of certain nutrients. Now, this has to be determined, obviously, with the help of a qualified healthcare provider. But just because something isn't deficient doesn't mean it's not insufficient for that individual. Just like an athlete or a cancer patient that needs more protein so they don't muscle waste, they might have normal protein compared to everyone else, but they may need much higher levels for what they're up to. Same is true with neurologic diseases, because neuroplasticity requires nutrition, a stimulus to get repair done. Okay? For those of you who've never heard of neuroplasticity, which might account for quite a lot of you, according to my experience with some of my patients with neurologic diseases, they've never heard of neuroplasticity. I often wonder what their neurologists are teaching them. And then, of course, we have toxins, particularly fat-soluble toxins, which store in fatty tissues like the brain, the regular fat tissue, and let's say the breast tissue, or even the prostate, which is fatty as well. Stress and stress hormones, a lack of sleep causes neurologic problems. Heavy metals, which are neurotoxic. They also affect hormones. They also affect oxidative stress, and they derail many important metabolic processes in the body. And inflammatory mediators. Perhaps no single factor, inflammation, has been shown to degenerate the nervous system more. So let's talk about this mini review on autism spectrum. So there was, we know that we have a rapid increase in the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder, suggesting that exposure to chemicals may impact the development of ASD. Once again, medicine does not seem to care about these things, but they are facts and they have been researched. In addition, and to carry that concept a little bit further in terms of exposure to chemicals, we have smoke and tobacco, we have alcohol, air pollution, pesticides, endocrine disrupting chemicals, that means hormonal disrupting chemicals, heavy metals, micronutrient issues, fatty acid problems, prenatal obesity, as a proxy of accumulation of specific chemicals can alter the health and nutritional status of the nervous system. And then among chemicals, we also have mercury and pesticides and bisphenol A and phthalates. There's so many others. And there's virtually no attention provided to these by neurologists and other members of the healthcare team in persons with neurological diseases, at least according to my 30+ years of experience. So let's talk about this particular study, which was a comprehensive nutritional and dietary intervention randomized trial, which was 12 months in duration. So this study involved randomized, controlled, single-blinded 12-month treatment study using a comprehensive nutritional and dietary intervention. There were 67 children and adults with autism spectrum disorder, ages 3 to 58, from Arizona, and 50 non-siblings with neurotypical controls of a similar age and gender. And basically what they found is that vitamin and mineral supplements were given, and they included the supplement that they gave, essential fatty acids, Epsom salts bath, carnitine, digestive enzymes, and a healthy gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet. Based upon this, there was a significant improvement. I'm quoting the study here, was a significant improvement in nonverbal intellectual ability in the treatment group compared to the non-treatment group. So the treatment group had significantly greater increases in the essential fatty acids EPA and DHA, the amino acid carnitine, and vitamins A, B2, B6, B12, folic acid, and coenzyme Q10. The positive results of this study suggest that a comprehensive nutritional and dietary intervention is effective at improving nutritional status, non-verbal IQ, autistic symptoms, and other symptoms in most individuals with autistic spectrum disorder. That is a big statement. How can this be and it not be a standard of care in neurology? Because it's not. And that's why you're listening to a show called Ask the Blood Detective, because what I'm about is providing information and a perspective of thinking so that you yourselves can become your own blood detectives. Those of you listening to my show on a regular basis know that I say this all the time. I want you to become your uh, your reliable source of information and logic. So when you read things like this, you don't have to waste years questioning why it's not being used. You can actually get to using similar things right away. So this is an interesting study that talked about the microbial health of the gut. Once realizing that there's what is called a gut-brain axis, which basically means that there's a connection between the gut and the gastrointestinal system, and that's why people sometimes say that they have a gut feeling about something. But listen to some of these bullets right here. So key regulators of the gut-brain function has led to the appreciation of the importance of a distinct microbiota gut-brain axis. So there's something going on between the brain and the gut that we didn't recognize before long. So this axis, as they call it, is gaining even more traction in various fields in medicine and research, and really impacting everything from the area of psychology to neurodevelopmental disorders, to age-related disorders, to neurodegenerative disorders, and more. So the gut health can affect the nervous system, and the nervous system can affect the gut. So the use of probiotics of specific types, there are different types of probiotics. Some help anxiety, some help depression, some are good for neuroplasticity, some are good for mostly gut issues. But these are the types of approaches that are required to maximize neuroplasticity and to help conditions like autism spectrum disorder, as well as Down syndrome, and all and anything neurologic, is to pay attention to the gut. But you see, in medicine, the gastroenterologists, the supposed gut experts, they don't talk to neurologists. And the neurologists don't really talk to the gastroenterologists. And neither of these two practitioners have much interaction with dietitians. And even if they did, dietitians are not usually trained in this level of nutrition. So we have a problem here in the very structure of medicine and healthcare. So elimination diets and their efficacy and mechanisms, how do they work in attention deficit disorder, autism, and even Down syndrome and other neurologic disorders? So here is what happens. Nutrition plays an important role in neurodevelopment. Now, this insight has led to increasing research into the efficacy of nutrition-related interventions in neurodevelopmental disorders. So we know now that there is this connection, and that you cannot and should not, well, you can, I suppose, but you should not be ignoring nutrition. In addition, elimination diets, which I'll explain what those are in a minute, as a treatment for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder, focused on the use of food additive elimination, gluten-free, casein-free, and what's known as an oligo-antigenic diet, or a really allergy-free diet. And when they did this, the gut-brain axis improved. Multiple systems in the body were affected in a positive way, including metabolic areas of the body, immune, endocrine, and just the entirety of the nervous system. Elimination diets probably work in part in these conditions because they remove either toxins or substances that you're eliminating that are otherwise interacting with the body in adverse ways. So you eat gluten, for example, eat casein, someone with neurological problems, and then the nervous system, I should say the immune system, sees these things. They make antibodies against them. The antibodies produce inflammation. Inflammation degenerates the tissues even further. The tissues look more unlike normal tissue, so the immune system responds more. So you've got this vicious cycle of autoimmune inflammation, oxidative stress. That's what's happening in autism. That's what's happening in Down syndrome. That's what's happening in Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis, anything neurologic, all of it. That is a very convenient truth when it comes to nutrition. Now, this particular study was entitled New Insights into the Mechanisms of the Ketogenic Diet. Now, some patients that I speak with, they've never even heard of the ketogenic diet. Now, let me discuss that for just a moment. First, it's a high-fat, generally speaking, high-fat, low-carbohydrate ketogenic diets. They've been used for nearly a century to treat epilepsy. That's 100 years or more. It's a long time. And they still aren't. Ketogenic diet is still not a mainstay of treatment by neurologists in their patients with neurologic disorders. Why is that? I can honestly say it must be a combination of ignorance or lack of education or an unwillingness on the part of the healthcare provider to make changes, because they are people too, and it's hard for people to change their old habits, or they just don't care. There are other reasons, but none of them are excuses for the fact that there's more than a little bit of scientific literature to support the benefit of the ketogenic diet in anything neurological, anything neurological. However, one does not have to begin a neurotic ketogenic diet. I've seen some of these diets, and most of them I've seen on these ketogenic diet groups on Facebook, for example, promote very unhealthy versions of ketogenic diet. You're trading one set of symptoms for another set of diseases. You can use medium chain triglyceride oil, and that's it, and not even change the diet and make a person ketogenic just that way. Almost no one I speak with seems to be aware of this, and it's not my original idea. As I continued to do my research, I found that other researchers found out the same thing I did, that you did not have to do a ketogenic diet. You can just supply medium chain triglycerides, which form ketones, and ketones are compounds which have to do with improving neuroplasticity. You getting it now? Good. Excuse me. Adult epilepsy, as well as other conditions ranging from autism to chronic pain and cancer, they also tend to respond to a ketogenic diet, because ketogenic diets help to improve and maintain lean body tissue, which includes organ function. As you lose organ function, your chemistries become abnormal, your health deteriorates. And that's true in, again, cancer and chronic pain, and anything neurologic, as I mentioned. And one of the more famous uses of the ketogenic diet is that this particular diet suppresses seizures refractory to anti-epileptic drugs. There are studies of this. And there are certain types of medium chain triglycerides, like a decanoic acid, which I mentioned here at the second to last bullet. So there's medium chain triglycerides, and they're not all the same. So it's important to get the right ketogenic MCT oil. Okay, for more information on that, you can email me at info@blooddetective.com. I'll give you the rest of my contact information at this point. My website is drmichaelwald.com. My email is info@blooddetective.com. And you're listening to Ask the Blood Detective. We're talking about autism. We're talking about Down syndrome in a little bit, but we're also talking about neuroplasticity and nutrition that is for the entirety of the nervous system. So if you have a nervous system, which all of you do, if you have a brain, you have a nervous system, you can benefit from the use of this nutrition. And then the ketogenic diet also affects DNA methylation, a novel epigenetic mechanism of this diet. What does that mean? This ketogenic diet affects gene changes that are happening with you every single day at every single moment for the better. That's what you need to know. And you should be aware too that there was a study here, but this is a pretty common idea, that glutamate and GABA, okay? Glutamate is an amino acid. GABA is in the amino acid family. It is a neurotransmitter in the brain. So in autism spectrum disorder, we know that there is a problem with glutamate and GABA. Basically, there's abnormalities in glutamate and GABA signaling. So this is probably why studies have demonstrated, as has my experience, that giving GABA, gamma amino butyric acid, that's what GABA is, to a patient with anything neurologic usually helps. GABA is quite amazing because there's very few side effects, if any. It can be used in very high doses with no toxicity, and it's been proven to help anything that supports the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the healing part of the nervous system, the relaxing part of the nervous system. Therefore, it helps anxiety, it helps promote sleep, and it reduces pain, and it promotes positive neuroplasticity. But the problem with glutamate GABA functioning in the nervous system is a problem that studies have shown that deserves attention. And here is an interesting study that did quite a bit. It looked at the relationship between vitamin deficiencies and various symptoms occurring in autism spectrum disorder. And the levels of a variety of B vitamins, as you can see, B1, B6, B12, also vitamin A, vitamin D, are often reported low in those with autism spectrum disorder. Now, here's what I found. I found, number one, that there is a good amount of malnutrition in those with special needs conditions. And you must identify that and correct for it, because if you don't, and you give someone a healthy diet, you find out what diet they need with all the components they need, you give them nutritional supplements, but they malabsorb that. So they don't absorb all that you're giving them. So as I like to point out all the time on my shows on Ask the Blood Detective is, you are not what you eat. You are what you absorb from what you eat. And then whatever health conditions you have, whether it's neurologic or something else, can increase or hyperutilize nutrition. So we really must identify malabsorption and correct it. There's also high lactic acid. Lactic acid is an acid, so it promotes inflammation. It disrupts all sorts of cellular functions and all special needs problems, but also Down syndrome. Low nitric oxide, poor body composition. Body composition is a way of testing an individual to see what their metabolic rate is, what percentage of them is muscle, water, or fat, and it checks many other important what are called biomarkers of health and wellness and health span. So whatever you're doing in autism spectrum disorder, whatever you're doing in Down syndrome, whatever you're doing in anything neurologic, it's important that your body composition improves. If you don't increase your lean mass with what you're doing, you're probably not helping yourself or whoever's looking to get helped in the long term. So that's how important a predictor of body composition is for long-term outcome. There's high levels of inflammation, I found. Poor calcium use. Now you're thinking, calcium, so what? Calcium's for bones. I'm talking about special needs. I'm talking about Down syndrome. Calcium is much more than an important and crucial element for bones. Calcium is a major mineral important for neuroplasticity, so we want it working right. Nutritional insufficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, along with nutritional deficiencies. Atherosclerosis. Problems with circulation. If there's hardening of the arteries, there's usually lack of microcirculation. So that means the nutrition that's in the blood can't make it to the brain and other places to the extent that you want. So it's important to check for atherosclerosis, which can show an increased biological age. Those with at least Down syndrome, they tend to age much faster than others. That's why they're getting Alzheimer's disease at a much younger age than the average population of people that do not have Down syndrome. They also tend to get more arteriosclerosis and more aging. That's what happens in Down syndrome. But we see some of these characteristics too in some of the special needs conditions. And then since we all talk about the nervous system, I tend to find all sorts of abnormalities in the autonomic nervous system. It is possible to check the autonomic nervous system, and that there is a non-invasive way of doing that. We basically have the patient lying down and then standing after a certain number of heartbeats, and then when they're lying down, that checks what's known as the parasympathetic or relaxing nervous system. Then when a person stands up, it checks their sympathetic nervous system's responses, like increase in circulation and blood flow to the brain and pulse rate and heart rate and all those things. And if there isn't the proper transition from lying to standing, then we can conclude that there are imbalances in the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of the nervous system. Where am I getting at? Different foods, nutrients, and other exercises, lifestyle habits can be focused on one or the other or both aspects of the nervous system to get it working in a more balanced way. And then sometimes microscopically, we might find things that I've written in the last bullet here where red blood cells are too large. If red blood cells are too large and the person does not have cholesterol over 300, which could cause that, or if the individual has larger red blood cells and is not receiving chemotherapy, which can do that, then that could be caused by folic acid, vitamin B12, B6, B1, vitamin E, and other nutrients causing large cells. Large cells don't live as long, large cells don't work as well. They're associated with all sorts of other health problems, so we don't want that around. And then sometimes red blood cells can stick together like pancakes. And there's a term, the French term for that is rouleau formation. Rouleau formation is stacking of red blood cells. And if red blood cells are stacked, they're not going to oxygenate normally. They're not going to work normally. They're going to cause a sluggish circulation. And a sluggish circulation to the central nervous system is going to be a problem, no matter what issue we're talking about of the nervous system. And there's more findings, but I just thought I'd give you a sort of a smattering of some of the things that I have found over the years that are problemsome in people with Down syndrome and people with autism and other neurologic problems. So let's talk now about vitamin D deficiency. This was a study that looked at infertility, neurodevelopmental diseases, which included attention deficit disorder, autism, and schizophrenia. And here's what was found. First of all, the process of development, sorry about moving this around so many times, folks. The process of development, okay, fetal development depends on a number of signaling systems that regulates the progressive sequence of developmental events. And the opportunity for errors and problems to occur during the developmental process is extremely high. Infertility and neurodevelopmental diseases such as attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder, schizophrenia are caused by specific alterations in these signaling processes. We know this. Vitamin D plays a major role in regulating these signaling processes. By the way, folks, so does vitamin A, so does zinc, so does resveratrol and other phytonutrients, so does melatonin. Okay, but in terms of vitamin D, there is an increase in infertility and an onset of neurodevelopmental diseases when vitamin D is deficient. So remember, I've talked about before that most national labs have a range of vitamin D from 30 to 100. 50 is where the bell curve is, where 95% of the population are, and then 2.5% are here on the low end, 2.5% are here on the high end. That's for 100%. So if you come out at a 29, your doctor's going to say, oh, you're just a little low, because 30 is the cutoff. You're not a little low. You want to be at least where 95% of people are. And better yet, you want to be about a 70. A 70 is where meta-analysis shows is the best place to be for overall best neurologic and general health. So if you have a low level of vitamin D or D3, your doctor needs to be giving you 50,000 units of vitamin D once a week for at least probably about 8 weeks. Then you check the vitamin D3 level again, and then you adjust the vitamin D level so that you move that person closer to 70 or anywhere lower than about 100, between 70 and 100. It's been said that the higher normal the vitamin D, the lower one's overall risk of morbidity and mortality, which means if you want to die earlier, you want to die with other problems, have a low vitamin D level. That'll do it. And this particular study also said that, this is a different study, my apologies, iron and vitamin D levels among autism spectrum disorders. This study suggested that vitamin D deficiency and iron deficiency and other forms of anemia, anemia is deficiency, there were over a dozen different types of anemia, were much more prevalent in those with autism. I've seen it also in anything neurological. And patients will sometimes say to me, Dr. Wald, but isn't everyone low in vitamin D? Well, the answer is no. But if the point that they're asking me is that, well, you know, if so many people are low in vitamin D, it somehow doesn't matter. It matters. Whether everyone's low in vitamin D or just a good deal of the population, vitamin D is that important to get right. It's super important. Here was a study about vitamin D and the concomitant use at the same time of omega-3 fatty acid supplements in children with autism. And it was a double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. So that's pretty good. Basically what happened was the use of vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids improved autism much better than either of these nutrients alone. And fish oil, for example, which is EPA DHA, it's the DHA portion which was the most important, because that component of fatty acids, of omega-3 fatty acids, is much more neurologically useful, you might say, for neuroplasticity. So sometimes I'll prescribe EPA DHA to a person and I'll give them more DHA, or sometimes I'll just use DHA. And in cardiovascular disease, I might use more EPA DHA. But if you have an autistic individual or someone with Down syndrome that has increased cardiovascular risk and cancer risk and dementia risk as well, and that's true, I usually give EPA DHA and then we'll adjust the EPA DHA dose based on that person's needs, okay? And then my last bullet here says that the use of digestive enzymes is also important, because if a person wants to maximize the benefit of the fat-soluble nutrients vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids, which include the EPA DHA, but they malabsorb. The digestive enzymes help them absorb both proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And if you take fish oils yourself, let's say, sometimes patients will say, well, you know, Dr. Wald, I took fish oils, but I can't take them anymore because it comes up on me, it doesn't make me feel good. That's usually due to the protein content of the omega-3 fatty acid, or it's because you are deficient in digestive enzymes to digest either proteins and or fats. So if you take digestive enzymes that have protein and fat digesting enzymes, and they usually come with some starch digesting enzymes as well, your tolerance to fat soluble supplements should improve dramatically and immediately. And then if you add MCT oil and probiotics, you've really got a very substantial neuroplastic approach here, something that promotes neuroplasticity to its benefit. Many people take MCT oil and they have digestive problems too. That usually signals a need for more digestive enzymes of specific types. Let's talk about melatonin and autism. What was very interesting in this particular study is that, and it was looking at autism spectrum disorder, and it was a meta-analysis, which is a particularly good study. The aim of this study was to investigate melatonin-related findings in ASD, including Asperger's, Rett syndrome, pervasive developmental disorders. And here's what it found. They reviewed all these different studies. 9 of these studies measured melatonin or melatonin metabolites, chemicals from melatonin in autism, and all reported at least one abnormality, including an abnormal melatonin circadian rhythm in 4 of those studies. The point to get here is that melatonin is needed for neuroplasticity. So different nutrients affect neuroplasticity in some of the same ways. Some enhance each other's effects. And then there are different types of subgroups of neuroplastic effects. So maybe melatonin affects some of them more favorably than, let's say, medium chain triglycerides might, or DHA oil might help something better than melatonin. So a combination of these things is always recommended, at least by me, as long as there's no contraindication or reason that an individual shouldn't take one or more of these supplements. And there are reasons sometimes why an individual person with either Down syndrome or autism or any neurologic problem should avoid some of these nutrients. That's something that you want to go over with your healthcare provider. So regarding autism, and the summary of some of the nutritional compounds, zinc is a known neuroplastic element. It's also important for immunity. The zinc that I prefer is zinc bisphosphate chelate form. B vitamins, but B vitamins should be in their activated forms. You need to know something about the biochemistry of nutrients to be able to read a nutrient bottle to pick that out. And then medium chain triglycerides between the 8 and 11 carbon length. Those are lengths of medium chain triglycerides. And those are the ones, in my opinion, in most studies on medium chains, are the best for neuroplasticity, to improve neurologic function, whether it's Down syndrome, whether it's autism, or any of the special needs. DHA oil, that's part of the EPA DHA, which I mentioned. Acetyl L-carnitine, that's a particular type of amino acid that is acetylated. So acetylated L-carnitine is better than L-carnitine. And why that's so important in anything neurologic is that L-carnitine helps to bring fatty acids like fish oil into the cell so it can get used. So it's like a shuttle. And different phytonutrients. I can't begin to emphasize to you the role and the extreme amount of scientific data that is positive supporting the use of plant-based nutrients, ranging from ginkgo biloba to astragalus to defraction mushrooms to resveratrol, quercetin, many others. I can go on all day, which is why I use superfood concentrates of plants products in all of my patients with neurological conditions, unless there is a contraindication. And then sometimes, depending on the health problem, we might use DHEA. Now that's different than DHA, which is fish oil. DHEA is adrenal hormone, and pregnenolone is another hormone. These 2 products should not be used. I repeat, they should not be used in Down syndrome, because those with Down syndrome tend to have high levels of DHEA, and pregnenolone can form DHEA. But in other neurologic problems, DHA and pregnenolone can help maintain the nervous system, actually help it grow and help it slow down neurologic atrophy, which is shrinkage. So it helps cause some hypertrophy. And then melatonin, as I mentioned earlier, along with GABA, very important for neurologic development. A multivitamin, so that's not just B vitamins, but minerals and other cofactors, all in the activated forms, very important. And then also taking a proper amino acid supplement along with proteins. So proteins are made of amino acids. We need proteins to maintain our lean body tissue. But we need specific neurotransmitters to help various special needs conditions and Down syndrome. So that has to be considered. And then these superfoods. So I have products on my website, which is a different website, BloodDetective.com. So BloodDetective.com is my supplement website. You can find most of these products there. If you have questions on any of these products, you can email me. But the superfoods, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 that you can see on the right side here, they contain concentrates of plants that are mostly green, then purple, then red, then orange. And I generally use all of these for every patient, but I might give them more or less of one or the other based on the total health picture to emphasize certain plant-based products that studies and my decades of experience say are best for this particular patient, okay? And then there is N-Acetyl Cysteine. That is a very potent antioxidant. I've been talking about oxidative stress, which is basically one of the fundamental ways in which the human being ages, not to mention its nervous system. So the right NAC dose is important. Turmeric as well. I can go on all day about that. So once again, you can look at these, consider these supplements possibly. You always want to talk to your healthcare provider about what the best supplements are, the right doses, when they should be taken, with foods, without foods, should it be timed near exercise, away from exercise, with certain medications, away from certain medications. So these are important considerations that a qualified healthcare provider can help figure out with you. So this is now the Down syndrome portion of this conversation. And here's, let me start with just a few statistics. So Down syndrome is one of the more commonly occurring genetic disorders where mental retardation is combined with nutritional diseases. We know that this is true. It's caused by having a third copy of chromosome number 21, and there exists 3 different forms. I won't mention them here again, but they're here for those of you who are interested. And the symptoms include intellectual disability, mental retardation, early onset of Alzheimer's disease, and the appearance of various phenotypical features in terms of how they look, flat nose, slanted eyes, short stature, etc. Now, in addition, there are all kinds of other health problems in the body. There are cardiac defects, there's thyroid abnormalities, that's a very common abnormality in Down syndrome, along with nutritional disorders. There's overweight, there's obesity, there's high cholesterol, there's high blood sugar, there's high blood fat. High blood sugar, high blood fat, high blood pressure is something called metabolic syndrome, very prevalent in Down syndrome. And all of these can be mitigated potentially through nutritional changes. But it's very rare that I find, again, neurologists recommending these patients to clinical nutritionists, hopefully that have doctorates of some sort, so they can look at blood work and read the chemistry and not just recommend foods and supplements just off the top of their heads. This is another study here that talks about how low vitamin D is very prevalent in Down syndrome, at least in the mouse model. And let me read you a little bit, a couple of these bullets. So Down syndrome individuals develop several neuropathological hallmarks seen in Alzheimer's disease, including cognitive decline and early loss of what's known as the cholinergic markers. So the good news is that all you need to understand is the second bullet. This study reported that oxidative stress, okay, was elevated in adults' Down syndrome brains, but when they were supplemented with vitamin E, these inflammatory oxidative markers were improved. They reduced. And if you reduce them early, you're going to offset a lot of neurologic decay, and you're going to promote positive neuroplastic effects. I'll read the last bullet to you. This study provides evidence that vitamin E, and that's just vitamin E alone, delays onset of cognitive and morphological abnormalities of the mouse model of Down syndrome and may represent a safe and effective treatment, particularly early on in the development of Down syndrome neuropathology. Some of you are saying, well, that's just a mouse. You have to realize that this is what scientists consider good science. We are not mice, obviously, but there are enough similarities that this is probably true in human beings. And in fact, it's been studied already and it's been shown to be true. Here's another study which talks about EGCG, which is from green tea, and whether or not it alleviates various symptoms in Down syndrome. So it was reported that treatment with EGCG, which is epigallocatechin gallate, say that 3 times fast, improves cognitive performance in animal models and humans, suggesting that EGCG may alleviate symptoms of Down syndrome. I've given some of the more technical reasons why that actually happens. The reason I'm giving all this technical mumbo jumbo is because a lot of you listening are physicians and researchers, and this is completely new to you, and you need to know that I got all this information from scientific journal articles that can be easily found on PubMed.com or the Cochrane database. Those, as some of you already know who listen to Ask the Blood Detective on a regular basis, those are the 2 main search engines that physicians, researchers, anyone interested in looking at scientific evidence will go to for reliable studies. I'll read the last bullet here. They conclude that known data accumulated so far provides promising evidence of how there's what's known as MMP9 inhibition. So this MMP9 stuff is detrimental to Down syndrome brains, and EGCG slows down that degeneration. That's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So let's talk about fatty acids a little bit more. We've talked about them in autism spectrum disorder and in the brain in general. Let's talk about specifically what happens here in Down syndrome. So first of all, let me read this to you. So docosahexaenoic enriched fish oils, that just means DHA part of the fish oil. Okay, so DHA plus medium chain triglycerides help shape, that is, the plasma lipidome. So in other words, the nervous system has structures that can be reshaped and shaped properly for proper neurologic function if there's enough fish oil there. So basically, that's what this says. There's a lot of, again, technical details in here, but I want to leave it at that. So fish oils, and particularly the DHA component, medium chain triglycerides, and the antioxidants we've established so far have to be fundamental nutritional focus with anything neurologic. Now, what is this study about? Prenatal epigenetics. Okay, what is that? So that means the genes that are forming in the developing fetus. And what is that relationship in terms of nutrition? So listen to this. Exposure to environmental factors such as nutrition, that's an environmental factor, stress, pathogens, toxins, even social behavior during the development, that's called gametogenesis, and early embryogenesis have been shown to be influenced and change the development of the offspring. Mounting evidence now links pollution, for example, to relevant adverse negative modifications of the nervous system, which basically means if there's pollution in the nervous system will not form properly. Pollution is an example of an epigenetic effect. Epigenetics simply means that pollution, along with nutrition, have effects upon the genes once the baby is born. So once the baby is born, it's epigenetic effects. It's not that, oh, the genes are there, they don't change anymore. That's old science. No one in medicine believes that that is true any longer, no one. So listen to this, the epigenetic diet, that means a healthy diet relative to the Down syndrome patient or the autism spectrum patient or anything neurologic. So the epigenetic diet refers to a class of bioactive dietary compounds. You'll find them in broccoli, soybeans, in grapes, in green tea, in fruits and vegetables. These have positive epigenetic influences, allowing the nervous system to develop more normally. And what this particular study is about here, and I'll read you the title, is monoaminergic impairment in Down syndrome with Alzheimer's disease compared to early onset Alzheimer's disease. So monoaminergic impairment means neurotransmitter problems. That's all that means. You're going to find that in Alzheimer's patients, and you're going to find that in Alzheimer's patients with Down syndrome even more relevant, or more prevalent, I should say. So people with Down syndrome are at high risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, we know that this is true. We know how some of the proteins break down in the nervous system with Alzheimer's disease. We know there's oxidative stress in Alzheimer's disease and Down syndrome. We know there's nutritional problems. We know there's malabsorption. We know there's oxidative stress. So why aren't antioxidants, phytonutrients, and vitamin E and DHA and MCT given as routine? Once again, they are in my practice. I can't speak for neurologists. Well, I did have and do have an old friend who is a neurologist, and I asked him, I said, why are you not using these types of therapies? He said, we don't learn them. We do learn about the ketogenic diet. It's about a paragraph in medical school, but by the time 5, 6, 7 years goes by and we graduate, we don't remember that. We're taught to write prescriptions and to do evaluations. That is the sad truth, at least according to a neurologist that I asked. So defects in monoamine neurotransmitters, just neurotransmitters that allow for thoughts, feelings, emotions, and processes to happen, are implicated in Down syndrome and in Alzheimer's disease. Okay? Yes, there needs to be more study in Down syndrome, but there's plenty of studies to show that these are problems. But you can improve monoamine balance from improvements in the diet. That is the point. This particular study here emphasizes what I just said before, that plasma amino acids, there are a problem with them in those with Down syndrome. So it was found that a spectrum of amino acids showed widespread differences in that levels of nearly all essential amino acids were lower in Down syndrome patients compared to healthy controls. Specifically, they found lower methionine and higher taurine. So if you have imbalances in these neurotransmitters, you're going to have problems with neurologic function, neurologic orchestration, neurologic repair, right? Neuroplasticity. So it's important to make sure that neurotransmitters are impacted as favorably as you can by modifying the diet. And here's something about a phytonutrient, luteolin, which you'll find in fruits and vegetables. It induces hypocampal neurogenesis. So that the hippocampus is a very important area of the brain, not just in Down syndrome, but in anyone. When you're talking about improving and maintaining neurologic function, you need to improve and maintain the function of the hippocampus. And luteolin has been shown to reduce degeneration of the hippocampus in those with Down syndrome, which is just astounding. Now, this study was a systematic review and meta-analysis, which looked at a bunch of different micronutrients in Down syndrome. And what they found was lower blood calcium in Down syndrome patients, lower selenium levels, which is an antioxidant and immune modulator and detoxifier, lower zinc levels. Zinc has effects upon at least 175 enzymes that I'm aware of. There were higher red blood cell levels of copper, sometimes zinc, and higher saliva, calcium, and sodium. High, low, you want these balanced. So the findings in this study of these micronutrient levels, they found that they are different between controls and Down syndrome patients, and that these nutritional imbalances, either too low of levels or too high of levels, can lead to adverse neurologic events and a lack of positive neuroplasticity. So we can see this is just one of many, many studies that show the importance of nutrition in Down syndrome. Antioxidants, I can't talk about them enough, can I? Well, individuals with Down syndrome have higher levels of oxidative stress throughout their entire lifespan. We know that oxidation is it's considered one of the major theories behind why human beings age, and certainly why the nervous system ages. Now, genes that are overexpressed on chromosome number 21, which is by definition the Down syndrome problem, are associated with oxidative stress. So this is why we see a lot of the degenerative changes we see in Down syndrome due to the defects in chromosome 21, which involve, among other things, higher levels of oxidation, which is what causes a lot of the Alzheimer's disease as well. So the lack of balance, this is the third bullet, in the metabolism of free radicals, which cause oxidative stress, have a direct role in producing all the neuropathology of Down syndrome. So super important to regulate oxidative stress. And I check oxidative stress markers when I give my patients antioxidants to make sure that the antioxidants act as antioxidants. This is very important for you to realize. Just because you take something that's called an antioxidant doesn't mean when you take it, it will act that way in your body. That's why sometimes tests are important to figure that out. This particular study is a meta-analysis of metabolites involved in what's called the bioenergetic pathways, or what they call the pseudo-hypoxic states in Down syndrome, meaning that it looks like in Down syndrome there's less oxygen. Studies have shown that there doesn't seem to be less oxygen, but the degenerate changes are identical to that. Let me read you a little bit more. Clinical observations and clinical studies both suggest in Down syndrome that it may be associated with significant bioenergetic alterations. They concluded that the cells of subjects with Down syndrome are in a pseudo-hypoxic state. They show all the degenerative findings that not having enough oxygen would do. And therefore, persons like myself in this field use antioxidants, might use hyperbaric oxygen or at least ambient air oxygen to try to reverse these changes, or at least to support this person with Down syndrome from a general health perspective because of what these studies show. It seems that the cells break down as if they were not getting enough oxygen. And here's a summary of a bunch of the nutrients that you might want to consider if you're dealing with Down syndrome or you have family or friends that have Down syndrome. Now, this list is virtually identical, if not actually identical, to the other list that I gave for autism spectrum and just neurologic issues, because they all should be considerations. However, this list does not contain the DHEA, that's the adrenal hormone, and the pregnenolone, the other sex hormone, that I did have in the autism area and general brain support. Those hormones can support neuroplasticity in other conditions, but they should not usually be given in Down syndrome, because in Down syndrome, there's also a higher rate of polycystic ovarian disease, or PCOS. And DHEA is an androgen hormone like testosterone, and higher levels of one or the other of these hormones tend to be elevated in Down syndrome susceptible to this, and that can make their PCOS worse. So let me kind of sum this up for you. And first, clarify my contact information, because many of you will give questions that will add to the next talk that I give. First of all, my email is info@blooddetective.com. So use my email to let me know about your thoughts of this talk, new other topics that you have, or any other questions. You can also post your questions on my blog on my website, and post them on the blog, because if I answer them there, everyone can see. If you just email me, I won't repost them on the blog. I just get too many emails to do that. Okay. And then my website is www.drmichaelwald.com, or this website that you see here, which is intmedny.com. My phone number you should call if you want to work with me personally at 914-552-1442. And the supplement website for those of you that are interested in my supplements is BloodDetective.com. So I want to thank you very much for your attention and your time today. I do hope that this information was useful to you, and I wish you the very best of health and happiness. Thank you very much.